My name is Drew Burchett. I'm a principal broker in Oregon. I live here in Portland and just wanted to talk a minute about appraisals. So the first question is, what is an appraisal? And just wanted to apologize in advance here. This material is pretty dry. So what the appraiser is doing is essentially doing a valuation of the home, the same way that you would do a valuation of a used car or a wedding ring for insurance purposes. They're putting a dollar amount on what the home is worth. And the way they do that is by looking at comparable solds from the neighborhood. Usually they're going to stay within a mile radius, and usually they're going to go back 6 months or less. But if there are no comparables in that circle or in that timeline, they will go wider and they will go further back. So their calculation is what I would call more of like a price per square foot calculation. It doesn't bring the heart into it the way that a realtor does. So as a realtor, when I'm looking at a property, for a listing purpose, I'm looking at all the subtle things that make the property cool and give it character. Of course, I'm looking at square footage and bedroom, bathroom count and stuff as well, but also just like the way the home sits on the property. Does it get good light from the south? Did they do a good remodel on the kitchen? Things like that. And the way the appraiser looks at it is a lot more black and white. So their valuation process is different than the way a realtor looks at a property. But all of that said, in my opinion, the value is truly in the eye of the beholder. So if you're the buyer and you had to compete to get this property and you're willing to pay a certain price, then that's the value. The value is what you're willing to pay. But the bank still has a say on whether or not they give you a loan, and that's why they do the appraisal, to make sure that you're not overpaying. How does the appraisal fit into the real estate transaction? So a lot of times we're going to order the appraisal pretty much within a few days of mutual acceptance. So you as the buyer, you write your offer, it gets accepted by the seller, and we're going to order the appraisal pretty quickly. The reason being is that the return of the appraisal report is the linchpin of the transaction as far as the timeline goes. So the lender can do all of their underwriting, all of their document generation, all that stuff pretty quickly. But it's really waiting on the appraisal that is the thing that holds things up. So we want to get it ordered right away. But we don't want to have the appraiser out to the property until we've negotiated repairs. So once we're through the inspection period, repairs have been negotiated, we know we have a transaction, we know it's not going to fall apart. We usually want to have the appraiser out to the property within a day or two of that. So what we'll do is we'll order it right away, and then once we get the call from the appraiser saying, hey, I'm ready to come out and look at the property. So if I know our inspection period is up on Friday, I'll say, hey, how about you come out the following Monday? And usually they'll accommodate whatever timeline we put out to them. So once the appraiser visits the property, they'll usually generate their report within 3 or 4 days of the site visit. So we don't get the information immediately, but usually if there's an issue that comes up, if they're having trouble making the comps work, if they're having trouble getting the value to match the sale price, they'll usually give the listing agent or the buyer's agent a heads up and say, hey, I'm having some trouble here. Is there any info you can provide that'll be helpful? But we don't always get that heads up. I will say that most agents in Portland, as buyer's agents and listing agents, are pretty good about communicating with the appraiser to make sure that they have what they need to support the value of the home that is the subject property. A question that I often get is what happens when the appraisal comes in low? So if we say hypothetically that we're looking at a sale price of $500,000 on a property, then we need the appraisal to come in at $500,000 or more. It doesn't matter what the buyer is putting down. It doesn't matter what the loan amount is. What really matters is the final sales price, because we have to be there or higher. So using that same example, $500,000, if the appraisal comes in at $480,000, we essentially have a $20,000 gap. So there's a few things we can try. We can try going back to the appraiser and saying, hey, did you consider these comps? Or try to get them to revise their number. That I have found is usually a losing battle. In fact, I don't think I've ever had one that came back and adjusted the price much more than 1,000 or two. And there's some reasons why they won't do that, and I won't get into that. So essentially you have a $20,000 gap. So there's two basic ways to overcome that gap. One is for the buyer to bring more funds to closing for down payment. So if they have an extra $20,000 they're willing to contribute to the sale, then they can bring that to closing, and that fills the gap. The other obvious thing is for the seller to lower the sales price. So if they lower it $20,000, problem solved. So I find that sellers are usually not super willing to lower the sales price significantly, and a lot of buyers don't have the resources to bring extra down payments to closing. So there are some things we can do to change the down payment percentage and have some of the original down payment funds go towards the appraisal gap. So there are some other threads that we can tug on to try to make it work. A few other random notes about appraisals is, if you're getting a loan on a purchase, the lender's going to require the appraisal. There's really no way around it. If you're doing a cash purchase, an appraisal is not required. I have had cash buyers that wanted to do an appraisal for whatever reason, but I don't think it's advisable. It's a waste of money, and it's not required. The appraiser is privy to the contract, so they have a copy of the contract. They know the sale price, they know the terms, they know all the information. So essentially what they're trying to do is justify the sale price. They see that buyer and seller have agreed to a certain number, they've agreed to terms, and they're not trying to derail the transaction. They're just trying to justify what buyer and seller have already agreed to. If you're doing a refi, so you already own your home and you're just refinancing your mortgage, an appraisal is going to be required. But the difference is there is no sales contract, there is no sale price. So the appraiser is doing a much more independent number. They're going to come up with what they're going to come up with because there's really nothing to work off of. I will say that by and large, those appraisals tend to come in pretty low. So I've gotten many panicked phone calls from sellers or from homeowners that, I sold a house to 5-6 years ago, and they get a call from me and say, hey, my appraisal for my refi just came in and it's super low. And it's a little bit panicky. But I explained that, the appraisers tend to be a lot more conservative on those types of valuations. So, and then I usually will give them my own opinion and valuation on price based on what I think, which is usually going to be more in line with the market and more in line with reality. There also is such a thing as an appraisal waiver. So that is where the lender essentially waives the appraisal. So that usually comes up when you have a high down payment and the property, when they do like a desk valuation, like what you would see on Zillow or Redfin, when that number is at the same price or higher than the agreed upon sales price, sometimes they'll just waive the appraisal. And my advice almost all the time is accept the waived appraisal. You do have the option to do an appraisal anyway. The cost is going to be $600 to $800 to generate the appraisal report, and it's really not going to tell you a whole lot that you don't already know about the property. So, like as your guide and your realtor, I can give you valuation information that's going to be better to build on to see if you're getting good enough of a deal. But usually if you're getting an appraisal waiver, you're usually getting a pretty good deal. So I usually would just go with it. So those are kind of the basic bullet points of an appraisal and how it relates to a real estate transaction. I hope you found this helpful.